Federal election in Australia is coming soon. The campaign is already unofficially underway, and the election must be held by the 17th of May. It's a joyous time for democracy lovers everywhere, but especially if you are not from Australia, you may have some questions. How do we vote? Who are we voting for? Who is in the lead? In this video, I will give you a crash course in Australian civics and set the stage for the 2025 election. This is the 2025 Australian election explained. Let's start with the basics of Australian Parliament. Australia is in the Southern Hemisphere. Population 27 million. Australia is a federation of states, former British colonies. The capital city is Canberra, and there are 6 states as well as 2 territories in the mainland. The government is a parliamentary system, sometimes referred to as the Westminster system. Why Westminster? Well, it's a portmanteau of Westminster and Washington. The lower house, or House of Representatives, closely follows the Westminster system from Great Britain. The Australian Parliament comprises 151 seats across the country, and the winner of a majority of seats, 76 in this case, forms government. The upper house, or Senate, on the other hand, more closely resembles a Washington-style Senate, as Australian senators are elected. There are 12 from each of the 6 states, and 2 each from the Australian Capital Territory and the Northern Territory, to make up a total of 76. Federal elections are held every 3 years on non-fixed terms. They can be triggered earlier, though in general a Prime Minister will go close to the full 3 years. At each federal election, all 151 seats of the lower house are up for election. Senators get 2 terms or 6 years, and about half are up for election each time. This time, 40 seats are up for election. Voting in Australia is a little different to many large nations. It is one of the few countries where voting is mandatory. Fines are relatively small, and you can leave the ballot paper blank if you wish. This is known as an informal vote, but you have to place a ballot in the box. Also in Australia, preferential voting is practiced. What is preferential voting? It is a set of systems in which people vote their preferences for candidates. This ensures the winner of the election has some claim to a majority of votes. That is, over 50% of Australians have chosen the candidate. The actual preferential voting system varies by house. For federal lower house elections, instant runoff voting is used. This is known in some other places as ranked choice voting or alternative vote. A voter must number all candidates on the ballot by preference, with 1 as their top preference. For example, if a seat has 8 candidates, you vote 1 for your first preference, 2 for your second preference, and so on until 8 for your last preference. When it comes to counting votes, first, the primary vote is counted. The candidate coming into the last place is eliminated. Then, the ballots of voters who put the last place candidates as their number 1 are distributed to the voter's number 2 candidate. This process is repeated until only 2 candidates remain. A winner is declared when one candidate has over 50% of the current votes. In the upper house, the single transferable vote is used. The ballot paper for the Senate is massive, maybe a little daunting, but the ballot is split into 2 sections to make it a little easier. The top part of the ballot lists the parties, and the bottom part lists each individual candidate. Voters can either choose to vote above the line and rank at least 6 parties from first to last, or below the line and rank at least 12 individual Senate candidates. Vote counting is complicated, as you can imagine, but the single transferable vote works in 2 ways. First, there are quotas for each seat. Once a party or candidate reaches a quota for a seat, their remaining votes are redistributed to their next ranked candidates. If all preferences are distributed and there are seats remaining, the last placing candidate is eliminated and their preferences are distributed, like in instant runoff voting. Our system of mandatory preferential voting is often a point of pride for politically minded Australians, and it certainly has its advantages. Mandatory voting better reflects the will of the population. It also discourages voter suppression. Sadly, it hasn't completely ruled it out, but it's much harder to discourage groups from doing something that is mandatory. It also encourages candidates to appeal to everyone, dimming down the power of extreme candidates, though they still exist on the fringe. Preferential voting is also a better choice than first past the post, as it means a candidate has to get a majority of votes. Simply getting more votes than the others is not enough. A right-wing candidate can't win based on the splitting of a vote between two left-wing candidates or vice versa. In fact, voters are more free to vote for who they want. Independent candidate, small party, vote them first if they better represent you. As long as you put your major party preference over the other major party, that's fine. Of course, it's not all roses. Mandatory voting does mean that everyone has to vote, even if they have no interest in politics. Nor has this system created a utopia. Psephologists debate whether instant runoff voting constitutes a true representation of the will of a people, though that's beyond the scope of this explanation. What is more salient is that this system has, traditionally at least, favoured two major parties. We'll get into the two parties and their rising challenges later in this video. And one of the more interesting quirks of mandatory preferential voting is the donkey vote. A donkey vote is when someone simply ranks the candidates from first to last straight down the ballot. And this has to be counted. Whoever's counting the vote cannot know the intent of a voter. Did they carefully decide their vote that just happens to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down the ballot? Or were they completely uninterested and just wrote 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? There's no way of knowing, so it has to be counted. So, that's a quick introduction to voting in Australia. Let's now look at the candidates. In the left wing is the incumbent government, the Australian Labor Party. Its leader is the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, who we often call Albo. The Labor Party is Australia's major centre-left party. It is coming into this campaign with the slogan "Building Australia's Future", touting socially minded policies on housing and healthcare, and promising to grow the economy by attracting investment, particularly around green technologies and renewable energy. A fun fact about its name? Some of you may have noticed Labour is spelt here without a U, despite the fact that Labour, as in work, is normally spelt with a U in Australia. Where did the U go? Well, around the time the party was founded, American-style spelling reforms were floating around in Australia. They didn't catch on. At the time, Australia was very close to Mother England, but the Labour Party retained the spelling, which helps differentiate it from the British Labour Party. And on the right, we have the Liberal National Coalition, collectively referred to as the Coalition or even the Liberals. It's a coalition of the Liberal Party, which, despite the name, is firmly on the centre-right, more on that later, and the National Party, which is more popular in rural areas. The Liberal Party has launched its campaign with Get Australia Back on Track, in a bid to recapture voters who have been disillusioned by the cost of living crisis that has occurred on Labor's watch. It claims it will improve the cost of living by cutting wasteful government spending, and will introduce nuclear power in the hope of providing cheap energy. So, back to the name. Why is the right-leaning party called the Liberal Party? Well, liberal in this case refers to economic liberalism, that is, smaller governments and laissez-faire markets. Those are the two major parties on the scene, but what about the others? In Australia, we refer to independents and the third parties as the crossbench. They have always played a minor role in Australian politics, but recently their voter base has been growing, especially in 2022, when they collectively won 16 seats away from the major parties. Who are the prominent crossbench players? Well, we have the Greens on the left, Pauline Hanson's One Nation and Clive Palmer's Trumpet of Patriots on the right, and then we have the Teal Independents. The Teal Independents are independents backed by the climate-minded businessman Simon Holmes-A. Then we have other local independents and small parties, such as Bob Katter's party in Queensland and the Centre Alliance from South Australia. Naturally, we can't go through all the minor parties and independents in contention. We'd be here all day. So let's go through the bigger players in the game, at least in terms of media attention. On the crossbench, there are two great forces currently in Parliament. The first is the Australian Green Party, or the Greens. The Greens have been around a while, but they had their best showing last election in 2022, winning 3 seats in Brisbane in addition to their long-held seat in Melbourne City. They also have 11 senators. Naturally, the Greens are firmly on the left, fighting for the environment and the cost of living and housing, though focusing more on renters and first home buyers, perhaps reflecting their younger base. The next group I'd like to focus on is not actually a political party. It's a group of independents known as Teal Independents. Their common thread is that they are funded by an entrepreneur and climate activist named Simon Holmes-A. In general, the Teals have been most successful in affluent suburban areas formerly known as Liberal Party heartland. They are generally fiscally conservative yet socially progressive, especially with regards to climate. In fact, they are called Teals as they are seen as a mix of the blue of the Liberal Party and the green to represent their green politics. There are 7 Teal independents in the lower house and 1 senator. Now, you might be asking, does Australia have a right-wing populist movement? Indeed we do. In fact, we were even doing it before it was cool, but it just hasn't gotten very far yet. There are 2 prominent right-wing figures. Pauline Hanson is a Queensland politician who came onto the scene in 1998, speaking vociferously against immigration and benefits for Indigenous Australians. Her party is called One Nation. While One Nation has had some success in Queensland, in the federal parliament Hanson only served 1 term as an MP in the late 1990s, and the party has had at most 4 members in the 2016 Senate. Currently, One Nation has 2 senators, including Hanson herself. The other populist figure is Clive Palmer, who is a mining billionaire and is, at least on paper, the closest we have to Trump. He founded the United Australia Party in 2013 and has made a lot of noise. Again, he has had some minor success in Queensland and federally in 2013 when he got himself elected as an MP and got 3 senators into Parliament. In 2022, he got 1 senator from Victoria in. Palmer deregistered the UAP to try and get out of obligations. Unfortunately, that meant he couldn't re-register it in 2025, so he bought out and took over a fringe party called the Trumpet of Patriots. Will Clive Palmer ride the Trump wave to glory? Time will tell. There are some more colourful characters in Parliament, but we're not going to get into them here. So, those are the players. What is the current scoreboard? The 2022 election saw the end of the Conservative coalition government and saw a large focus on climate action after the coalition was seen as lagging on climate targets and Australia had just suffered massive bushfires and floods. Following on from this, Labor now has a slight majority of 77 seats, and the coalition retook the mantle of the opposition with a total of 53 seats, 39 for the Liberals and 14 for the Nationals. The crossbench now has 19 seats, the highest in recent times, with 4 Greens MPs, 2 belonging to minor parties, and 13 independents, 6 of which are Teals. 2 seats are currently vacant, 1 ex-Labor and 1 ex-Coalition. The Senate is currently composed of 25 Labour members, 30 Coalition members, 11 Greens members, 2 from One Nation, 1 from United Australia, 1 from the Jackie Lambie Network, another colourful character, 1 from Australia's Voice, 1 from People's First, and 4 independent. So, the million-dollar question, who will win? Well, of course, we don't know. And the polls aren't pointing to a decisive victory either. They have generally been looking better for Peter Dutton and the Coalition, but Labour has started to make a comeback. What polls do seem clearer on is that a minority government is likely, given the large minor party and independent vote. A minority government occurs when no party can reach 76 seats. In this case, the major parties must get other MPs to guarantee them supply of funds. This has happened once before in 2010, when the Labour government had to form a minority government to stay in power. Polling, of course, is not a crystal ball, and this applies in Australia too. There have been countless Prime Minister hopefuls who have lost unlosable elections. In my lifetime, this includes John Hewson in 1993 and Bill Shorten in 2019. In addition to the regular warnings about polls, seat-by-seat results are hard to predict, and third parties are often underestimated, which is of course becoming a bigger problem today. And determining where their preferences will go is also difficult. Incidentally, if you look at an Australian poll, you may see 2PP or 2CP. This stands for Two Party Preferred or Two Candidate Preferred. It shows who will win out of the top two parties, usually Labour and the Coalition, after all preferences have been distributed. Polls should also include the top vote estimations, called the primary vote. Now, let's take a look at the issues and what the people of Australia are thinking. I should say that this section is going to be much more subjective than the others. I cannot understand what every single Australian is feeling. Often the best of us don't find out the real mood of the electorate until election day. With that disclaimer, let's look at the issues. There are some major issues that are practically indisputable, and many other issues that may or may not be important. The big issue is cost of living, with housing and health being the other major issues. So, like the rest of the world, inflation has taken its toll, and the cost of living has been at the front and centre of Australia's minds over the last 3 years. This is the cost of everything, from energy to supermarket prices, but Australians have been feeling it most in the cost of keeping a roof over their heads. Houses, long seen as an investment vehicle, particularly after the Coalition government made it easy to do so in the year 1999, reached insane prices after a COVID-fueled boom, worsening supply and rising interest rates. This put further pressure on renters as well, as supply of rental properties became even tighter as people demanded more space to work from home, would-be buyers spent more time in the rental market, and the reopening of borders caused a sudden influx of immigrants. Prices have largely stabilised, but problems remain. Health is also an important issue, especially as the cost of it has gone up. Australia's robust healthcare system has started to show cracks, and people are having to pay more and more to see the doctor. While cost of living is the big issue, there are some other issues that pop up and may have some significance. How much significance is hard to tell for certain. There are growing concerns about crime in many communities across Australia, and it has come up in recent state elections and by-elections. Climate and the environment aren't quite as strong as issues as they were in 2022, likely because people have focused their attention to their wallets. Even so, it still features strongly in polls, suggesting that it's something parties can't quite ignore either. Recently, a major storm hit Brisbane and the surrounding areas, and climate change has pushed up the cost of insurance. Concerns about immigration did seem to be a major concern in 2023 and for a while in 2024, but it seems to have fallen by the wayside in 2025, save some maybe some concerns when it comes to the impact of immigrants on housing. Australia's standing in the region and questions over how it would defend itself given everything that is happening in the world have dominated the news. Hard data is scant, but most polls of this nature were asked on or before January. Now, given Trump's latest tariffs and China's warship tour of the Southern Hemisphere, it's very possible Australia's position in the world will also factor in. So, how are voters feeling, and which way are they inclined to vote? Of course, this is the most difficult part to gauge. We truly won't know until the election, but here are some broad strokes. Labour was suffering a slump in the polls. Whether or not it was their doing, they have presided over one of the worst cost of living crises in recent history, and voters have been looking for someone to blame. Labour has attempted to tackle inflation, housing, health, and general cost of living issues, and they have had some success. Their recent pledge to boost funding to public health insurance was quite popular. Some voters, however, may not feel that it is enough, or it is too slow. The alternative is Peter Dutton and the Coalition, and he stands poised to take some of the anti-incumbent swing. However, voters have been left wanting on policies that will tackle the cost of living and housing affordability directly. Dutton has been scant on policy details thus far, stating simply that they will lower costs by cutting wasteful government spending. Additionally, the Coalition has more seats that they need to win. The Teal Independents mostly took coalition seats the last time around, and most of them don't seem to be going anywhere. Both parties are struggling with the general disaffection of voters towards major parties. Indeed, an incumbent party getting a swing against them after their first term is not unusual in Australia, but Labor barely achieved a majority in 2022. Voters are not confident that the major parties are truly making the bold decisions. It is worth noting that both parties do have grand visions, but they haven't been hitting home. Labor has the Future Made in Australia plan, which aims to leverage our critical mineral resources to bring modern green manufacturing to Australia. It sounds aspirational, but it hasn't been communicated all that well, and currently sounds more like some vague behind-the-scenes initiative. The Liberal Party has been proposing to bring cheap, clean energy in the form of a massive nuclear power investment. They announced the plan late last year, hoping to make nuclear power a topic of discussion at summer barbecues. But, as far as I can tell, it didn't turn out that way. The cost of nuclear power was questioned even before the plan was officially announced, and above all, it just isn't all that appealing to Australians beyond a few corners of the internet. Not to mention, whichever big party wins will likely have to deal with a crossbench to form government. The Liberal Party looks to be quite unpopular with the current crossbench, but the Labor Party also seems to be unwilling to deal with the Greens at this present time. How do voters feel about the crossbench? Well, the Greens are the largest minor party, but they face problems of their own. They may continue to capture disillusioned voters on the left, but those who follow politics may be put off by the fact that the Greens have delayed many progressive policies in Parliament, particularly around housing. While they did it with the noblest of intentions, to get more from the government, it is not a good look for them as a left-wing party that they ended up siding with the right-wing Coalition on more than one occasion. Is it then time for the populist right to shine? Well, we have been asking this question since 1998, and more seriously since 2013 I guess, so it comes and it goes. It is worth noting that Australia doesn't have a large base of people like in the US, the UK, France or Germany who are left out in the cold by globalization and may be tempted to vote for populists. Miners can make bank as long as they're willing to fly in and out of the northwest, and our manufacturing worker population was never as large as in other countries, and people were largely able to adapt. Outside of Queensland, right-wing populists haven't had the massive appeal. Does Trump change the equation? He is definitely making an impact, but following his policies is a big risk in Australia. Yes, he is a household name, and he definitely has his supporters here. Still, as I said before, Australia doesn't have the large base that makes right-wing populism so popular, nor does it have the strong libertarian slant that makes Trump such a beloved figure, and many Australians are fearful of making their country more like the United States. Not to mention, we just find him tacky, and any copycat even tackier. In fact, Dutton has been flirting with Trumpist politics, but has recently decided to tone it down. One Nation currently polls at around 5 to 10%, and the Trumpet of Patriots is lucky to get 1%. They might be able to rally up the supporters, particularly with Clive Palmer's money, but as of now, I'm not hopeful. This leaves the independents, Teal independents in particular. Independents are looking good in the eyes of voters. Independents as a whole poll at about 10 to 15%, and they have strong grassroots appeal, and more Teal candidates are ready to fight in coalition and even Labour seats. Yet, the Teal independents are not a cohesive party, and climate action is really the only true unifying policy on their agenda, so their true influence is limited. So that's a rundown of the Australian federal election 2025. It's going to be a tight race, and politics nuts should have a fun time following the ups and downs of the campaign. Time will tell how it goes. Do you have a question about the election or Australian politics? Leave a question in the comments below. Thank you and have a good day.